I apologize about that. My baby came in, so I had to interrupt the recording. I'll just continue from where I was. So anyway, the point is that for these European religions, there's no overarching all-powerful God. There's no concept of that, and so they basically had to get rid of. They fought. They kind of had a war of the gods, and Jesus wins. So eventually, they throw out the entire pantheon. It's a little bit different for these African religions because many of them have some idea. They have a pantheon, but over it all, they have some idea of a remote kind of God who's overall and has created all things and has all the power, and then the pantheon exists under this God. So for them, it's not so much throw away the pantheon for and replace it with the kind of Christian God. For them, it's more of this idea of bringing that God that was so powerful closer. That God was usually very remote. You can't talk to that God directly. You can talk to the pantheon. Now the pantheon you might think about as saints or angels or whatever, and that God is very close. That God has become Jesus. That God has now become the person that you have a relationship with, that's close to you, that you pray to directly. The last question is 9. How does the story of the failed and then successful conversion of the Orkney Islands illustrate the means of Christian conversion? How was barbarian Christianity different from earlier versions? And then how did the barbarian descendants feel about Christianity in other cultures? So the conversion of the Orkney Islands is a cool story. The king of Norway basically forces the local earl to become a Christian, takes the earl's son hostage. But as soon as the hostage dies, people go back to their old religion, and the earl's like, you don't have power here anymore. But then when the local earl himself became a Christian, he went on pilgrimage, he repented, he gave up piracy. He saw the way of raiding, the Viking way, as basically being wrong, and he changed. And he focused instead on building cathedrals and making laws and all these kind of things. And this was the real beginning of the conversion of the people. So it shows, again, of course, that it has to come from within. It can't be imposed just from without. That force is not helpful, but that Christianity can be adopted for many reasons. It fits the agricultural lifestyle better. Eventually, their way was changing. The way of life was changing from raiding to agriculture, and they needed a new religion to reflect that. The kind of warrior religion where all you do is, even the gods fight eternally, is not helpful if you're mainly plowing fields. And it also connected them with all of Europe. You can make a pilgrimage to Rome. You can have some peace and diplomatic relationships with your neighbors. Barbarian Christianity was different because it was focused, instead of like Greek religion, on specific definitions of God. It's focused on purity and codes of conduct. You see this in the questions they ask, uncleanness from childbirth on the part of women, uncleanness from men, from nocturnal emissions or from ejaculation, and these are actually questions that are very similar to the ones the Jews asked. This is the interesting point, is that like Jewish Christianity in some ways is closer to this form of Christianity because Jews also have notions of uncleanness through childbirth and through emissions, and so this is an interesting change in focus, but in some ways it's a remix of existing ideas that are already baked into the religion. Then there's also the dreams and the visions. It was led by dreams and visions in a way that was not so important for the very literary and philosophical Greco-Christians. These are non-literary people, so they think maybe in more visual terms, written terms. And then many years later, the point here is just many years later, these barbarians' descendants become modern-day Scottish and British and Dutch and Germans, who are sending their missionaries all over the world, and they're skeptical again of these Asians and Africans, and to some extent Latin Americans, who have visions, who have dreams, who have different focuses on their religion. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The religion goes to a new peoples. The new peoples have a very different way of thinking about it, and the original missionaries may end up feeling left out, not understanding what's going on. So that's question 9, and this is your quiz 2, class 2 material.